When I read Finnegans Wake, I can't help but think that Joyce had an anxiety disorder. Because as one who has one myself, I can't help but see a deep affinity in Finnegans Wake regarding the thought process of anxiety. The way that it takes minutiae and blows them out of proportion, the way that it creates this neurotic obsession with detail and with scope, with an inability to ground oneself even in the most materially obvious and potent of moments. And in this lecture, I'd really like to explicate what does this actually look like from a sort of phenomenological, psychological point of view, the way that Finnegans Wake affects us as we read it and the way that this is a mirror of anxiety, and also looking at the mechanics of Finnegans Wake, the syntax, the poetic rhythm, the sound, the way all of this is serving, as I think will be clear by the end of this lecture, an anxious purpose, to show us an anxious world in an anxious mind. Now, I think one of the fundamental things that Joyce is trying to tell us in Finnegans Wake about the mind is that it always speaks for more than one. It is not dominated by an ego, but is always being contested by a number of voices which vie for dominance, for superiority, for a chance to have themselves heard. And 2 pages from the end, Izzy says, "Is there one who understands me? One in 1,000 of the years of the nights." And that is the great question of any of the characters or voices, including Joyce's own in Finnegans Wake. Can anyone be understood or recognized in this world so dominated by multiple voices? And not merely out there, but also in here, in the mind, in one's psyche. One is being dominated by a number of competing voices. And the trouble for one with anxiety is that these voices are amplified and multiplied. The sort of everyday mind where one feels that one has solid fetters, that's done away with. We experience the polyvocality of the mind in all of its extremity and excess, and every murmur turns into a concerted shout of a crowd ready to condemn, to articulate, to explicate, to exceed what one would think as the limits of possibility. This is why it can be so uncomfortable to have anxiety, because it manifests for so many different people in so many different ways. But for me, I found that in my social interactions, it makes me incredibly neurotic and obsessive. It ruins my sense of having a firm foundation to even my most deep relationships, because I'm always haunted by this sort of plane of or fabric of invading excess, a sort of anxious warp and weave that kind of entangles itself in my everyday interactions, and it makes it such that everything teems more than I thought. And I think Joyce wanted to do that with language. He wanted to show language as a fundamentally anxious tapestry. Because what Joyce does is he takes language, the language, the implicit definite article here of a singular language, and he really flips it on its head through implosion. By accreting possibilities, and by taking into account different tropes and traditions and expectations and voices and readers, he takes any one thought in any one language and shows it to already be speaking for multiple thoughts and for multiple languages. Hence, this is the polyglot work of all polyglot works. There's over 70 languages that Joyce is using that scholars have accounted for at this point, and there's, certainly more than that. And really, if we're trying to talk about how many languages are there in Finnegans Wake, or how many voices are there in Finnegans Wake, we're met by the problem that Finnegans Wake is going against the very idea of a discrete language or discrete voice in the first place. Every unity, every monad is always already double, extreme, multiple, polyvocal, whatever you want to say. So the real problem of Finnegans Wake is that therefore we don't get a main character. And I think he's really going against this idea of the main character on a psychological level too. That the anxious person realizes that they are equally defined and constituted by themselves as this supposedly, discrete voice, as they are by the other and by the others that they depend on and they constantly invoke in their thoughts. And Joyce understood that this was the case with language. That, for example, when we use language in a sort of everyday sense, we're supposing a linguistic competence which we bring with ourselves, which is the culmination of a whole life of experiences with others, right? We sort of whittle down our accent, our diction, our grammar, and we use all of this to speak what we suppose to just be English pure and simple. But Joyce wants to show, of course, that in this process of accretion, by which we learn and by which we come to be creative, we are always being impregnated with an excess of particularities that yield to us a particular cadence when we speak, a particular tone, a particular rhythm, a particular inflection, particular grammar, particular choices of whatever it may be. We all have, and for example, if you've watched this channel for a long time, you know that I have my own unique particularities of my speech that guide my cadence and my tone and my choice of words and my frequent malapropisms. All of this is so central to Joyce's understanding of the psyche and of language in Finnegans Wake, because every word is always already double, and this is explicated most clearly with his infamous portmanteau words. And right, the portmanteau is really being used by Lewis Carroll before Joyce, but Joyce takes it to a whole nother level, because what it does is the portmanteau prevents us from this, from kind of coming to see language as discrete and stable and essential. Instead, we have a number of layers. This is of different associations, of different words, of different signifiers, which compete and try to vie for the same space in an anxious, neurotic manner. And we as readers often get anxious and neurotic when reading this text precisely because we don't know which word or association or reference is primary. And part of the problem is Finnegans Wake so takes advantage of words which are deeply imbued with ambiguity and oftentimes with totally contrary meanings to one another. I think of the word moot. In American English, if something is moot, it is irrelevant. If a point is moot, it is so unimportant as to be irrelevant. But in British English, it means quite the opposite. If something is moot, it is of critical importance. If something is moot, it needs to be taken into account more. So if I say a point is moot, I will get quite the opposite indication of what this word means depending on my context. And Joyce wants to sort of collapse all contexts together into literature and show that with this self-reflexive understanding of language itself, we have a neurotic bending backwards, trying to accommodate all the possible meanings, references, significations, semioses of these words in such a way that we no longer have a discrete word. We have a one which is already many. And for example, it harkens to things that are not even explicitly spelled out. They may merely be homophones, right? Words that sound the same but are spelled differently. A common one, for example, is see. This could be S-E-A, as in the Irish Sea or the Black Sea, or this could be see as in to see, to look. And oftentimes, Joyce will invoke either one of these words even when the other one is the one that is being spelled and written down. Because he wants to show that the very conditions of language, such as orthography, right, our conventions of spelling, are ways of artificially reducing language and the possible connections that we can make. And he wants to show that all the time there is the possibility to come up with fun, new, complex accretions and additional meanings just by realizing that things like homophones exist. And this is totally the sort of thoughts of an anxious mind. I always am having these sort of obsessive thoughts over language just because, oftentimes I'm in a social interaction and I wonder, oh my gosh, that word, it could mean this thing, but it could also mean this thing. And what if they meant it in an offensive way? Or what if this is a slight or this is a jab that I just don't get? When I was a kid, I was terrible with getting like sarcasm and jokes. And still to this day, I'm too serious and sensitive sometimes. And it keeps me from taking things as lighthearted because some possibility opens up and we go down that road. And that is what happens in Finnegans Wake. And in fact, we could say that the whole of Finnegans Wake is a sort of byway in the environs of possibility. Because in Finnegans Wake, as many will know, there is a crime that has been committed. Or has it been committed? What does it even mean to commit something if we're in a dream when in fact, at the end of the day, all actions are really, effervescent nothingnesses? But there's supposedly been a crime committed. And the question is, of what nature is this crime? Well, it seems to be of a familial nature, of a sexual nature, of a public nature. And all of this gives us a number of accreted but irreducibly multiple possibilities for what the crime could be. It could be something very banal, or it could be something very extreme. On the most banal level, HCE, Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, is in a park and is peeing in a bush and is seen by two women who report him to 3 soldiers. That's the most banal version of the crime, which is, it is probably a crime officially, legally, but really it's not something to fret over. All men have peed in bushes. Plenty of women have peed in bushes, I'm sure. But there are a number of possibilities that spring out of this. And don't take this as me saying that this most banal meaning is the most primary meaning and all the other ones spring out from this. No, we are exposed to all of these possibilities of the crime bit by bit, such that at one time we are exposed to the most banal and the most extreme end, where we can't see one as the exigency for all of the other ones. So the other possibility is that HCE comes upon the 2 girls peeing in the park, and he watches them, and they see him, and they report him to the 3 soldiers. Now the other possibility could be that the 3 soldiers find him looking at these 2 women peeing. There's a possibility. Now another could be that the 2 women are engaged sexually with each other, and HCE is simply watching, and the 3 soldiers see him, or the 2 women report him to the 3 soldiers. That's another level. So now the women are the ones being sexual. Now there's another possibility that in addition to the 2 women doing something sexual with each other in the Phoenix Park, HCE is also masturbating at the same time. And once again, either gets caught by the 2 women and reported to the 3 soldiers, or the 3 soldiers spot HCE looking at the 2 women engaged in their sexual encounter. Now another possibility is that HCE has publicly revealed himself to these 2 women, that he is a sort of exhibitionist, voyeur kind of thing, and wants to show himself off. Either just literally show himself off, or show himself off whilst he is masturbating. And again, either he's reported by the 2 women, or he is found by the 3 soldiers. Now another possibility is that the 2 women and HCE are engaged in an orgy in the Phoenix Park and are witnessed by the 3 soldiers. Finally, it could be the case the HCE, the 2 women, and the 3 soldiers are all engaged in a 5-part orgy together. No, 6-part orgy together. But the most extreme possibility is that all of this is a way for HCE to think about having sex with his daughter Izzy, or Isabel, or Isolde. She has a bunch of different names throughout Finnegans Wake. So all of this may be a sublimated way for HCE to cope with incest, with incestuous thoughts, with incestuous intentions, or with the past incest he's committed. Because one of the things about HCE is that HCE is a voyeur. And voyeurism is very interesting because it necessitates a relationship with the other, but it seems to carry with it a distance. The voyeur wants to be detached, wants to watch, and thus HCE doesn't feel implicated when, for example, he feels himself to be watching these women doing any of the possible things that they could be doing, merely urinating or doing something sexual. They could also be having an orgy with the soldiers, and HCE's watching from the outside, right? There's another possibility. And this makes HCE feel like he's not implicated in what's going on. It's merely happening, and I merely happen upon it. And this could be a way for HCE to try to defend his sexual thoughts with his daughter by saying, well, they just happen and I'm sort of an innocent bystander. Right? So all of this is deeply implicated in some very alarming, fundamental thoughts occurring in the mind of HCE. And we might ask, to what extent are any of these genuine thoughts? Well, Finnegans Wake gives us no answer. And I think that's important because this goes back to anxiety. What does it mean to have a genuine thought? Well, I don't think that, because we are not one person, because we are always already multiple voices, there are many thoughts, many of which are legitimately thought in the sense that they actually happen and occur to one. And who cares if they're genuine or not, so much as how we react to them and how they interrelate. That is what Finnegans Wake is concerned about. It is not moralizing, trying to find the right thoughts to have. What is the right crime for him to have committed? What is acceptable? Rather, it is concerned with the way that thoughts, whatever they may be, banal or extreme as they may be, how are they turned from their murmuring particularity into the shout of a crowd which comes to condemn, which is always already inside oneself and incited and invoked by the other. So Finnegans Wake is really understanding the way that language always works like a rumor, and that really we've absorbed language like a rumor and have since forgot about it. But with the anxious person, this rumor is reignited. We are suddenly brought to the reality that language is always delivered and communicated by rumor. The fact that in our heads, as we're imagining what we are going to say in advance, we are really engaging in an act of rumor with ourselves and with the multiple competing voices in our head. Therefore, Finnegans Wake wants to take this to the extreme and take every possible parameter of thought and transplant it onto every parameter of language. Show that just as important for the psychological world as thoughts are, so for the textual world, words are. So Joyce is concerned with orthography, rhythm, cadence, tone, pitch, timbre. He's concerned with poetic rhythm. He's concerned with the page layout. He's concerned with the amount of pages. He's concerned about the psychological state of the reader. He's concerned about the time in which it's being read, the historical moment in which it's being read, the politics of the reader, the politics of the time at which he's writing it. All of these aspects of words are important for Joyce. And really, this is the sort of neurotic obsession of an anxious person, who takes these into account not because they want to, but because they have to. Because it is a stark realization one has no point but to take part in, to heed, It is a ruf, or a call, as Heidegger would put it. That literature instantiates all on its own. And that thought does all on its own. That sociality does all on its own. Merely the fact of there being an other incites the possibility and the questioning of what are they thinking? What are they doing? What do they mean? And all we get in Finnegans Wake, just as we get with the anxious brain, are the questions. How do I react? How should I feel? How can I make this stop? And HCE is concerned with waking up. How do I get this nightmare of history, as Stephen Dedalus would call it in Ulysses? How do I get this nightmare to stop? And as we know, it's like being asked to stop thinking about a pink elephant, or to not think about a pink elephant. Now, all you can do is think about that pink elephant further. So there's this sort of obsessive, neurotic, hermeneutic spiral that is both always going inward and just kind of burrowing deeper and deeper, and also going outwards, right? Expanding, accreting, increasing in breadth, magnitude, and extremity. So there's both this interior movement going on and this disseminating, widening, accreting movement going on at the same time and in the same respect. This is what it feels like to have anxiety. This is why I'm so smitten by and taken aback by Finnegans Wake. Because so intimately does it understand what it feels like to think like me. So that being said, that's it for this lecture. I hope it's been somewhat interesting. You can check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic literature. You can also become a channel member for $5 a month because it really helps me. You can join my private philosophy Zoom and tailor it to your needs. I also have super thanks if you just like to donate to the channel because it helps me get all the books necessary to enjoy the books myself and help you enjoy them too. So that being said, that's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.